Hello and welcome. My name's George, and my channel is all about helping you get the most out of Logic Pro so that you can record and produce your best music in your home studio. Today, we're going to be looking at how you can record a 9-piece band live off the floor in a home studio setting using home studio gear. So let's dive in. So for starters, here's a look at the session. So I've got drums, room mic, bass, percussion, congas, guitars, 2 guitars, keyboards, and 3 horns. So as I mentioned, this was 9 players and came out to being 22 inputs. And when you're preparing for a session like this, it's a good idea to map everything out ahead of time so that you know exactly what you're dealing with, how many inputs you're going to have, how many mics you need, how many cables, etc., and etc. So for that, I create what's called an input list. And for this particular session, it looked like this. So I have a list of all my inputs and then all the instruments that I'm going to be miking, and then all the microphones I'm going to use, and any external preamps that I have listed as well so that I know where everything's going to be plugging in. And doing this ahead of time saves a lot of time, just as far as organization goes, especially when you're dealing with a lot of inputs like this. It's easy to lose track of things, but if you have everything mapped out ahead of time, then it makes it really clear, and you just need to follow the list that you prepared for yourself. Now, in order to get the 22 inputs that I have, I'm actually using 3 different audio interfaces, and each of them have 8 preamps built in. So you'll see I have a bank of 8 here, another bank 8 there, and my last bank here. And how that works is my main audio interface, which is the first 8, that is a Motu 896 connected using USB. And then my next 8 are 2 other Firewire interfaces that I have, which actually they're no longer being supported in the latest Mac OS. So I can't actually use those as dedicated audio interfaces anymore. However, they do have ADAT on them, and that lets me send out the track information via ADAT to my Motu 896. So the second bank of 8 here, this is another Motu interface, the Motu 8 Pre. So it has 8 preamps, but it also has 8 channels of ADAT output. So I hook that up to my Motu 896. And then the last 8, this is a M Audio Profire 2626. And again, it has 8 preamps in it. And I output those digitally to the 896 as well. So I've mentioned this a few times in the past. If you have some older Firewire interfaces that aren't getting any use anymore, you might want to consider hanging on to those because you can use them as expansions for any new interface that you get, provided that they all have ADAT. Now, as far as the microphones that I use on this session, for the most part, they're kind of on the budget side of things. A lot of dynamic microphones, and the main reason for that is to try and cut down on bleed between all the instruments since everyone was playing in one room. If we had a whole bunch of condensers, then you'd basically get all the instruments in all the other mics, but dynamics help cut down on that. And really, the most expensive microphones on this list are probably the Rode NT2A and the Shure SM7B, which is this mic here. And they're both kind of in the $400 to $500 range. But all the 57s, those are kind of $100 each. The NT5s are $400 to $500 for the pair together. These PG56, these are again cheaper, kind of $100 microphones. They're very similar to the SM57. So I'm not using anything crazy expensive as far as microphones goes, just kind of standard home studio microphones. Now I'll just touch on a couple of these. For example, the kick, we actually had 2 microphones. So I have one, this Shure Beta 52. This was kind of in the sound hole of the kick drum. And then there's also this Beta 91A. And this one's kind of a unique mic that actually sits right inside the drum. And it looks like this. You can just kind of lay it flat on the drum, or if you have like a blanket or something in there to deaden the sound, you can place it right on that. So I'll let you hear the difference between those 2 mics, and then we'll kind of do a blend of those when it comes time to mixing. And then the snare, we also did 2 mics, so one on the top of the snare and one on the bottom, both 57s. The toms, 157 and one of these PG 56, which is very similar to 57. The overheads got small condenser mics, these Rode NT5s. So these will pick up all of the cymbals as well as the hi-hats. I didn't have a dedicated hi-hat mic, didn't really feel the need for it. And when we listen back, you'll hear that there's plenty of hi-hat in these overhead mics. The timbales, we didn't actually end up using on the song. We had them set up, but we didn't end up using those. So those just had a pair of dynamic mics. Same goes for the congas, another pair of dynamic mics. The bass, we used the DI, so no amp, so there's no bleed to deal with. The guitars, there was 2 guitars. The one guitar I had set up a DI for a clean sound, but also on the amp as well. So I've got kind of the 2 I can choose from there, and I'll probably kind of end up blending them in a little bit. And the second guitar, I just have a dynamic microphone on the amp. And I also have a room mic just to capture everything in the room. The keys, those are DI'd as well, so there'll be no bleed to deal with there. And then the horns, trombone, bari sax, and trumpet, those all got dynamic, these kind of broadcast mics, SM7B, and a couple MV7s, which are very similar. Now, the other decision I had to make with this is I've got 5 external preamps that are kind of higher quality than the built-in preamps from my audio interface. So I had to make a call of how to distribute those. And I ended up going with the kick, the bass, and the horns for those. Now, in retrospect, I probably would have done this a little bit differently. And the reason because is we're going to be overdubbing the horns. So with that said, I could have just used one of my standard preamps for the horns and redistributed these elsewhere. So maybe I could have had one on the snare and a couple on the overheads, or perhaps the guitars as well. And then later when we overdub, then I would go back to using those preamps. But really, it's not a big deal. Just something I could have planned for if I knew that we were going to be overdubbing the horns at a later date. Now, a quick note about monitoring. So since we were all in the same room, there was really no need for us to all have headphones. We just kind of treated this as if we were rehearsing together or playing on stage together, all in one room, so we could listen to each other clearly and not have to rely on any headphones. If we were isolated and in different rooms, then definitely you would want headphones so that everyone could hear each other. And with a bigger band, like a nice 9-piece band, then we'd have to look at getting some external headphone amps to accommodate that, because most audio interfaces only have 1 or 2 headphone outputs. So you have to look at some additional gear if you want everybody in the room to have headphones. Okay, now let's jump into the session a little bit and show you how things turned out. So in my previous video, I showed you how I kind of organized and color coded everything. So everything, each instrument has its own track stack as well as its own color. So everything is kind of easy to see and find, all nice organized, as well as our markers up here. So now as far as the sound's concerned, I'll just kind of play a few of these so you can kind of hear how it turned out. So here's the kick, what I call the kick out mic, and this is the Beta 52. and then the kick in, which is that 91A. So you can hear that this kick in mic has a lot more kind of bite and attack than this one. And this one has kind of more of the body. So when it comes time to mix, then we'll be able to blend those two and kind of get the balance that we want. Together they sound like this. And then similar with the snare. So we have one for the top. So kind of a nice dry sound at the moment. And then the bottom. And with that bottom snare, again, you're going to get a little bit more of the attack and a little bit of a brighter overall sound. So again, we'll kind of blend those two together when it comes time to mix. And then the toms, let's find a little fill here. So there we go. Again, a few dynamic microphones on there. The overheads, so as I mentioned, this will be all of the cymbals and hi-hats. And when it comes time to mix, we'll probably EQ some of the low end out there to get rid of kind of the bleed from the kick. And then the room mic sounds like this. So basically kind of sounds like a rehearsal mic. And what I like to do with this in the mix stage is over compress it and get it sounding kind of really gritty. And when you blend that in with the rest of the track, the drums in particular, it just kind of brings the energy up and everything. It'll really sound kind of trashy and not all that great on its own, but when you mix it in with everything, it just helps kind of elevate everything. So the drums all together, again, unmixed, sound like this. So there you go, some nice clean drum sounds there with some inexpensive mics. The bass, again, was just direct. So no bleed to deal with there, so that'll be nice and easy to mix. The percussion, this we actually overdubbed. So the Shekere woodblock vibra slap and the chimes. The reason for that was our percussionist is also playing congas, so we could only do kind of one of those at the time. So we played the congas live, and then we overdubbed the rest of this here. Always love that vibra slap. And for this, I just use this Shure SM7B for all four of these instruments. We just did them one at a time. And then the congas, again, a pair of dynamic mics. So you hear a little bit of guitar and a little bit of hi-hat in there, but that's okay. And then the guitars, so as I mentioned, we have one direct signal. So that's nice and clean there. And then the same guitar, but now with the amp. So a little bit of the drums in there, but not much. So again, we'll see when we mix which one we like better, or maybe blend the two together. And then the second guitar, again, had a dynamic mic on the amp. And then the two guitars together. And we'll probably add a little bit of reverb to those when we get to the mixing. The keys, these are all DI, so no bleed to deal with there. And then lastly, the horns. As I said, we're going to be overdubbing these, but give you a sense of what they sound like for now. And you can hear kind of the drums and guitars in those mics as well. Now, overall, the performance of the horns was fairly good. The main reason for overdubbing them is just, in this band, the horns carry the melody kind of throughout and are kind of one of the main instruments. And we just want to make sure that they're captured kind of as cleanly and just the performance be as tight as possible. So, rather than kind of stop the band all the time to punch in, we just recorded full takes. And now we can, at a later session, go in and kind of section by section, really nail all of the parts and, overdub the solos if we need to. But the essence of the band will remain because everyone was playing together. So the groove is going to stay intact. And we'll just kind of overdub those main lines. And for example, if I mute these horns and we listen, you'll see that you can hear a little bit of the horn still in there, but it shouldn't be enough to matter once we overdub. So I hope that gives you a sense of what's possible with just some regular gear kind of in a home studio environment. As I said, this is a 9-piece band, so this is probably going to be as big as you would want to do in a single room, but it most certainly is possible. So don't let kind of the lack of gear stop you from recording. It's just a matter of planning, and if you're short on some things, well, then I'm sure between all your bandmates, if everyone has 1 or 2 mics, you could probably get together what you need. And as I mentioned earlier, none of these microphones are overly expensive, so you certainly don't need kind of thousands and thousands of dollars worth of microphones. So the next step with this track will be to record the horns, and then we'll move on to the mixing process, and I'll be sure to share that with you as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comments below. And I also want to thank you for all the likes and subscribes. And lastly, if you want to improve your workflow in Logic Pro, don't forget to download my free Ultimate Logic Pro Starter Pack. This includes my Logic Pro hotkey cheat sheet with all the most common shortcuts right at your fingertips, as well as my audio recording guide to make sure that you have a flawless recording session. My mixing guide as well, with all the most common Logic effects and plugins. My gear guide, if you're just starting out and want to know exactly the gear that you need, and my Logic Pro session templates to help you get started right away. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.